Well, she's going to have to boogie early. How's that for Italian?
Pretty good.
Susan Garwood joins us this morning. I turned on the wrong microphone there. It helped turn on the right microphone. Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm doing great, thanks.
I sure appreciate you coming in. I know you have a lot of things you want to talk about this morning. How are things going at the Historical Society?
Going really well. Thanks for asking. Yeah, we're in the last stretch of our 90th anniversary, and we're doing really well. Lots of exciting things coming up in these last few months.
And the expansion there, boy, that certainly is very nice.
And it's been transformative for us, really. Everything from the education programs that we've been able to have in there to large groups who are now able to actually all be together. Before we used to have to break them up into small groups of 10 or 12, and now we can handle larger groups. And then part of the subject for today is our programming, the ability to have programs like what we've got coming up. They wouldn't have been possible prior to that expansion. Plus, of course, all of the amazing things that can happen with the space for storage that we never would have been able to add. Some great treasures that are Rice County's history and past that we wouldn't have been able to partner with just to help preserve. So
people who love history, and you're one of them, obviously.
I am.
Have to love being a curator at the Rice County Historical Society Museum because it's so rich.
Well, it really is. You know, Rice County, by its connection with Alexander Faribault, who was here, literally, he was here in 1819, before, almost 50 years, 40 years before we were a state. The kind of connection there, the experiences, it just makes Rice County's history that much richer, and the collection as a result pretty amazing as well.
I always like to brag when I get the chance that we have more buildings on the National Register of Historic Places than any place but St. Paul in Minnesota.
Exactly. The city of Faribault does. Exactly. Yeah. Well, and what's really neat is watching how the businesses are investing in those owners. They're the ones who are making that preservation possible, and the work that's being done downtown is just beautiful.
So we're going to talk about some upcoming events. I'm just going to get a little teaser in here. Next Tuesday, you have a special event that sounds very interesting.
Yeah, we have a guest speaker who's had her DNA tested for for a variety of reasons, one of which is a genealogical reason, and she found some interesting findings.
Yeah, that's the teaser, folks, and maybe we'll talk about a little bit about the findings. The event is Tuesday.
It is Tuesday at 7 o'clock at the Historical Society in the new Carlander Family Room, which is the big meeting room in the Addition Park.
Yes, and it's very nice too.
It's beautiful, thanks to the Carlander family who
you do a lot of nice things in there.
We have been and look forward to doing some more.
In fact, on September 25th, from 1 until 4, there'll be an event in that very room again.
Exactly. The two boys who work on the 1855 video series about Faribault history, they're celebrating their 1-year anniversary.
Yeah. We, of course, had a chance to visit with one of those lads, Samuel Temple, during the Rice County Fair. It was very interesting to talk to the young man about his love of history, which, you don't think a lot of teenagers are into history, but he is, and his partner from Northfield on the show is too.
Right. Logan and Samuel they've caught the history bug.
That's good. When did you catch the history bug?
Probably about their age. Never really interested in history, but that's it's more about the stories of people, and you can see it in the way that the 1855 tell those stories.
Yeah, well, we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the events coming up. In fact, the night at the museum is on Saturday, October 8th. This genealogical research event is on Tuesday, and then September 25th, we already mentioned that, so a lot of stuff coming up. Power Enterprises, your John Deere dealer with locations in Owatonna, Hollandale, Belle Plaine, also Osage, and Northwood, Iowa. Susan Garwood is with us. She is the executive director of the Rice County Historical Society. I'm very jealous.
It's a pretty great job.
I think it's a pretty awesome position to have.
Yeah, I enjoy my work very much, and I count my lucky stars for working there.
So. Yeah. How long have you been there
now? 13 and a half years.
Time flies, doesn't it?
It does. It does.
And you've seen the expansion, and I'm sure you've seen attendance grow there too over the years.
We have. We've been working really hard at that with programs and other things just to make history more approachable and available and all those kinds of things.
So again, Tuesday, Jan Stevens is going to give a presentation.
Yeah, absolutely. Jan has given a number of presentations over the years, and when we were doing our 90th anniversary, we really wanted to increase programming. So I gave out a call to Jan, who again I've known for a long time, and thinking that maybe she would talk about some of her other areas of interest, and she said that she had done her DNA testing and she found some interesting findings. And we talked more about that. I had read a couple of recent articles in genealogical magazines about DNA testing and what they can tell you and what you could do with that information. And so her own personal research and coupled with my own interest has resulted in this upcoming program.
I know you want people to attend the program. It's Tuesday night.
It is. Yep, it's Tuesday at 7 o'clock at the Historical Society. It's free for members, 2 for non-members. Although we encourage folks to make a reservation, it's not required. It just helps us with some of the planning. And I'm happy to share a little bit of the story. To be fair, I don't know the whole story.
So if you want to hear the whole story, go on Tuesday, folks.
Right, but what she found, Jan is a classic Midwestern complexion. We are pale. We are, the Scandinavian blood runs deep in the majority of us, and in many of us anyway. And Jan, in doing her DNA, found that not too many generations ago, she also has some African blood. And she embraced that information and was excited to see, well, what does that mean? Who were the people that she may have been connected with, whether they were slave relationships or whether there was some other story that was going on there. And I genuinely don't know the connection, except that what's exciting about Tuesday is she's going to share what the steps she took were. Where did she go? How did she find the answer to what was this family connection?
So she did get the answer?
She did.
Oh, cool.
She did.
I can imagine being floored by this.
It's a pretty startling thing. If you believe your background is, Norwegian and Swedish and a little bit of Irish, and then all of a sudden you find, oh yes, and African, or in my own ancestry I found a little bit of Asian background, and it's interesting to think about, well, how far back does that go? Because of course the DNA can tell thousands of years of story. Your findings can go based on the DNA and the genetics, and that's probably more than we want to cover on this.
It kind of makes sense though when you think about it, because, well, I mean, I know my ancestors, my grandfather on my dad's side came over from Germany, so that's relatively recent that they came over from Germany.
Sure.
And, Europe.
Well, that's just it. And people have moved just as we continue to be. I mean, as much as we are the majority of us spend our lifetime around where we were born, there are still many who move, who have changed from one place to another. Now, the United States is huge, but if you superimpose the United States from coast to coast, I think I did that once. It was something like Kazakhstan to Ireland. So, I mean, if you think about that kind of range of movement, moving from one state to another, one country to another, prosperity, wars, opportunity, all kinds of reasons over a millennial to move. It's not surprising that we have a more diverse genetic line than we might think we do.
Right. So have you had your DNA done?
I haven't. I'll be honest with you, I've not been sure which one to go with. There are a number of options. I know that there's the Ancestry option, which I think is the least expensive. It'll right around $100. And then there's 1, 2, 3, and Me, which is double that. And then there are others. That's part of what I hope to hear about tomorrow, is her recommendation for which one. I know she did 1, 2, 3, and Me, and I want to know why. But I also know that was something she did for last year's holiday. That was they have a seasonal discount. So I'm hoping to make a decision, and that'll be my Christmas gift to myself, is to do my DNA testing for genealogy reasons.
Did she tell you how long it took to get the results back?
She said it was several months, but I can't remember exactly. Again, I hope to hear more about that
Sure. And again,
on Tuesday.
The event's Tuesday.
Tuesday.
7 in the evening at the museum.
Correct. Yep. Tuesday, September 20th, 7 p.m. at the Historical Society. Again, we encourage folks to call and make reservations, although it's not required. It just helps us with knowing how many chairs to set up, that sort of thing.
Before I move on to the 4th annual night at the museum,
right.
Before I move on to that, I did want to touch on it because I saw on your calendar that the Southern Minnesota Tourism Association had a meeting in Northfield this week.
Yeah, they do. In fact, I think it was
yesterday and Wednesday.
Yep. I wasn't able to attend that because of the work schedule, but yeah, there's some really neat things that are happening. The tourism associations in Northfield, Faribault, and Owatonna have merged together, pooling resources to promote us as a corridor of places to visit. The goal, of course, being not just people who come for a part of a day or even a single day and then return, but who think about us as a place to go for a weekend stay, because you can see all kinds of things down the Highway 35 corridor between us.
In fact, we had some folks in studio last week on this program talking about the Feet of Jesse James Days, which was last weekend in Northfield. Speaking of historically significant events, it's probably the most famous event Northfield is known for, right?
I would agree.
But we had touched on the fact that maybe, and I don't know if you could rename it now, it should have been called Joseph Lee Haywood Days.
Sure, or yes, but things are funny. Jesse James was the catchy name.
Oh, yeah.
How many people know Bonnie and Clyde but don't know where they were killed or where they were.
That's true.
Or the people who chased after them. It's the criminal that people know. So, but what I'm really proud of Northfield is that it had originally been Jesse James Days.
Yeah.
And sometime many years ago, but they really thought similarly that it wasn't about Jesse James, it was the defeat of Jesse James that they're celebrating. Still getting Jesse out there, so it's catchy,
yeah.
But they're celebrating the defeat, and you can see that throughout their weekend.
Get a chance to jump on his notoriety.
Absolutely.
Because he was known all over the country.
Yeah. I used to work at the Northfield Historical Society. It's the first place I worked in my career, and I had an opportunity to meet the director of the Jesse James House in Kearney, Missouri. Milt was his name. And Milt used to say, Jesse's given back more to the communities through his notoriety and tourism and visitor dollars than he ever took. That was Milt's idea. I countered that that may have been, but I'm quite certain that everybody would have preferred that they hadn't been robbed, but
right.
Still.
Well, not just the robberies. He murdered a lot of people too, didn't he?
I'm not sure that many people were killed, absolutely, in the escape, etc. I don't think Jesse sought out to murder people, but
maybe murder isn't the right word.
People died in the process of their robbery.
But
and more importantly, before FDIC, that insurance, taking money out was the destruction of businesses and livelihoods. So
yes, in 1876 there was no Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation.
Exactly. And so that's why Joseph Lee Haywood put his life on the line. When you think about what was in the Northfield, in the First National Bank, it was money from Carleton, money from the fledgling school St. Olaf. It was of the Ames Mill, which would later become the Campbell Mill, which would become Malto Mill. It was the downtown's bank, the primary one. There was another, but most everybody had their funds in First National Bank, and had they been taken, there would have been no recourse, no way to get that money back.
And you probably know the story. How did the James Younger gang know that there was this gold mine sitting in Northfield?
Well, by the time that so 1876 was the raid, they had been robbing banks for over 10 years. They were pretty well known, even though you didn't have technology and internet and selfies and all that sort of thing at the time. The James gang was still well known, through media and other publications. And so they had to start stretching their circle of where they were robbing. And they had a somewhat new member of the gang who had been from the Minnesota area and said, they're just quiet, easy farmers, and it'd be like taking candy from a baby.
Oh, and they found out different when they hit
They
Northfield.
did. They did. They found the quiet farmers were also many of them Civil War vets with iron wills, and that Scandinavian and New Eastern stubborn line and determination to not let something that could have been very devastating to the community happen.
Yeah. Well, let's get on to a night at the museum. Susan Garwood's with us, Executive Director of the Rice County Historical Society Museum. Sounds like a lot of fun. Night at the museum, 4th annual event on Saturday, October 8th.
Right. That's also the Fall Festival downtown, but the Fall Festival ends at 4. And so hang out here downtown and then come on over to finish the day at the Rice County Historical Society.
You got a lot of items on there. You want to touch some of those?
Sure, happy to. You know, the whole idea of the night at the museum is all of the buildings are open. You know, normally that only happens during the fair, which is a really busy time. So we thought it was a neat opportunity to have all of the museum buildings open. And we have, what's different is that we have costumed people in there who are stepping back in time. So when you go to the cabin, you'll meet Mrs. Poe, and she's in her home. She'll likely be making bread and doing other things there, and you can visit with her as though you were stepping back in time. When you go to school, be prepared to learn a lesson or two from our teacher who's there. We have a woman who is preparing for her daughter's wedding, who will be in the church, as well as the musician who's playing at that wedding practicing. We'll have Mrs. Maud Headline Mellish Wilson there inside the museum. She was the woman who actually created the Mayo library for the Mayo brothers and actually edited the majority of their works that went out and was used to train doctors and so on. So these are costumed people who are telling stories from the first person, from as though they were that character in the past. In addition to that, we tested last year and have modified it a little bit this year with our flashlight tours. This is going to be in our Harvest and Heritage Hall. It's a guided tour as you make your way through. There'll be 6 characters in there. Lights will be out. From the 4 to 5 o'clock time period, frankly, it'll be pretty light in there. So it's a good time for families who might not want to necessarily have a slightly spooky experience. But as it grows dusk, from 4:15 to 6:30, every 15 minutes, groups of 10 will be able to go through Harvest and Heritage Hall and tour that building. It's not intended to be spooky. This event isn't it's not a haunted house, but rather it's like stepping back into the past. Also, we will sell some food. We'll have a fire so that you can actually roast your hot dogs if you want to over that. And this year we have some local folks who are going to be actually playing some music, and you can join in a sing-along around the fire if you like.
And the good thing about this time of year, you know, during the fair, typically it's pretty hot. So the people that are in these costumes, which always blew my mind because it had to be hot back then.
Yes and no. Well, first of all, wasn't this fair? It was just crazy hot. So, yeah. But back then, you know, cotton was the material that they made. Cotton breathes, and so although there's certainly lots of layers, that was less hot than you would think it might have been. The other is, I think, to be honest, people respected that heat a little bit more. We have a tendency to just keep going. We'll just, you know, just keep going. It'll be air conditioned, or you just keep moving, versus then in the heat of the day, you'd stop. You'd take a nap, you'd relax, you'd stay cool. Even our school system, for example, reflects that. The time period, we have the summer off. That's because this was before air conditioning. Kids were needed on the farm, as well as the heat made it pretty unbearable to be inside.
Yeah,
so
there is talk about going to year-round school.
Now we can, and I think there's a lot to learn, and I think that interesting studies are happening about how children learn. So that's interesting. But also because of air conditioning, it's feasible to do that now.
Yep, that wasn't known at the time. It's interesting because Al Quie, former governor, Rice County native,
Absolutely.
I visited with him at Near Strand School shortly after they became a charter school.
Okay.
And he said, I'll never forget this, he said, this is the way we should educate children. We talk a lot about peer teaching and, that sort of thing. Team teaching and peer education. They had it down pat in those one-room schoolhouses, right?
They did. They did, I've heard many stories, and that's part of what we hope to also get out of our Night at the Museum event is stories from the visitors as well. We've heard stories from people who go through the one-room school about things like, you might have been in first grade and you'd be finishing your addition, but second graders are starting to learn multiplication, and they're doing that. You can overhear some of that. So by the time you get to that point, it's not a completely unfamiliar concept. And so the other thing that allowed to have 8 grades in a single room allowed you to be a bit more fluid. Perhaps you excelled at math and you could join the next level up, and perhaps you struggled a little bit with reading and you could join another group. So it was less stringent to be at a certain grade level.
And you might recall the woman who won your essay contest during the fair talked about how she made friends with a guy who was, I think, in 6th or 8th grade, quite a bit older than her when she was little, and they became lifelong friends.
Yeah.
They still say hi to each other when they see each other and stuff. That was so cool. She said we didn't even know what bullying was. Bully was never even a word that we used.
Yeah, but we do. I am familiar with that. We hope to have Delna there, and in fact, one of the neat things, that was the essay contest from the fair, of course. The fair organizers bind up those essays for us and actually give those to the Historical Society so that people in the future can, again, read some of these great stories from people's experience.
And that was a gem.
Right, and one of the early questions you asked is, when did I become a history buff? It was about the same age as the 1855 Shindig boys, and it was because of the stories. It's all about, history is the story of people.
And we all have a story.
Well, we do, and it's interesting. People are interesting.
They certainly are. So, I think as you get older, you tend to reflect a little bit more, don't you think? On how were my ancestors? Who were my ancestors? How did I end up here? That kind of thing.
Yeah, perhaps it's because as we move through time, we think about, and we create generations by having our own family and so on. We think a little bit about what legacy we might leave, and what legacy, who came before us. What of our culture, what of our habits, where do these family recipes come from? How many generations back are they from? And just those kinds of things that influence and introduce themselves into our lives, we wonder where they're from.
I do remember, as a kid, a friend of mine and I, we walked through cemeteries. I know it sounds weird, and it probably is, but we were always fascinated at how old some of those gravestones were.
Yeah, absolutely.
1760, whatever. I mean, it was just
not here in Rice County.
No.
But certainly farther out east. Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting. My son is taking a class. He goes to Mankato, and he's taking an early American history class. And again, because of genealogical research I've just done on my own family in the last few months, I said, so when you start studying about those pilgrims and the Quakers specifically, who came here in 1630, keep in mind that's your family. I found that my family had came over in 1630.
Wow.
And he's commented on how, knowing this isn't just a random list of dates and people and events, but his family's experience, how that has changed how he hears the lesson. And I think that's important to think about, that history isn't just some random people, but it's actually our story.
Yes. I've always believed, too, that local schools should do local history.
Oh boy, I couldn't support that more. Place-based education, learning about the past of here helps you better understand and connect to this place. I think I agree completely.
Yeah.
Even if you're a transplant, I think knowing the history of the place helps you feel more connected to that place.
Makes it more interesting, I think, for the kids too. I mean,
Well,
this is where you live right now.
We find that to be true. You know, a lot of times people think, oh, kids aren't interested in history. Boy, we find that to be completely the opposite. Again, those two, 1855, they're in, what, 9th grade, 10th grade, something like that? And this is something they've started because they were passionate about history and wanted to tell these stories.
And they do a good job with it,
They
too.
do a great job.
Yeah, check it
Yeah.
out. It's on YouTube.
It is.
Right?
It is. And on the 25th, come on over to the Historical Society. That's a Sunday at 1 o'clock, and you can learn more about them, about what they've done, and so on. You know what? I don't know that we've shared the phone number. I keep saying you can call and make a reservation, but I don't think I've shared the...
What is it?
It's 507-332-2121.
All right, we've only got about a minute left in the show. So in summary, again, Tuesday night it's DNA and genealogical research with Jan Stevens.
7 o'clock. Yep.
Sounds very interesting.
Should be good.
Then on September 25th, 1 until 4, they'll be commemorating a year of filming and producing the Faribault History Series 1855, and a night at the museum is on Saturday, October 8th. That sounds like it's fun for the whole family.
It is. That's the goal.
So make sure you get on over there, folks, and take some of this in. Thanks, Susan. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for
I meant to
calling.
get you out early here, and I completely forgot about it.
That's all right. That's all right. I appreciate it. And I've got a group tour coming to the Historical Society to look at the Schimmel Verde Grand that we have there. So
I'm sorry about
that's all right. Thanks for letting me out.
I was hoping. I guess I'm getting old.
Well, or it's just an interesting
But
topic.
then again, I do enjoy visiting with you.
I feel the same.
Thank you. That concludes today's edition of AM. I was supposed to get around a few minutes early so she could go for this tour. I apologize. You're in tune to KDHL AM, Faribault, Minnesota.